This week on Moments That Matter, we are picking up with part 2 of a keynote address presented by Dr. Alan Lee to the faculty of Southern Wesleyan University. Dr. Lee presently serves as Program Director and Professor of Christian Counseling at Kingswood University and is a committed Christian seeking to honor God through his work in the world of counseling. His presentation deals with personal wellness, carrying significant value in this era of continued COVID. I think you'll find his words both comforting and challenging as we learn to be our best selves during this ongoing global pandemic.
So what are some ways that we can manage them? Nobody likes to feel anxious. It's not a comfortable place for anybody to be. So what can we do with it when it shows up? The first idea I would offer is just to write down your worries, write down your anxieties. And if you're a journaler, this kind of fits right into your practice. But if not, then I would also say just have something handy, a notebook, a Post-it note or something, so when thoughts come up, jot them down. It kind of signals to our brain that says, okay, we can move on to something. It also allows us to track any themes that show up. If my thought or my worry goes to finances, or if it goes to health, or if it goes to whatever else, maybe that's a theme that we need to look at a little bit more closely for ourselves. The idea of thoughts also seem to feel a little bit different when they're expressed. When we can pull it off the circular motion that takes place in our mind and put it out someplace, it tends to look just a little bit different. But there's also the element of the intentional action that brings the thought under control. And there's a lot to be said about this, that rather than letting it run us, if we can reach in and pull that out and take some control of it, it's very helpful. Secondly, maybe challenge the anxious thoughts. Look at what is distorted. And sometimes it's helpful to talk to somebody about this, to kind of walk through the process with somebody. But sometimes we can identify in ourselves what is real, what is not real, and how are we distorting those thoughts that are leading us towards anxiety. By asking these three things. What's the evidence that the thought is either true or not true? What backs up? What's the reality? And I find it helpful if you can find three things. So if my thought is, I'm incapable, then I want to list three things that are factual, that are concrete, that will either support or disprove that, and use that as a challenging. Is there a more realistic but yet still positive way to reframe the situation? Recognizing that nobody is perfect, no situation is perfect. Is there a way I can look at that same situation, but in a realistic and yet helpful? What's the probability that this feared element will actually happen? Ed Hallowell has done a lot of research on worry, and he would say that 99% of what we worry about never really comes to fruition. It never really happens. And so to use the energy worrying about that is unhealthy. So if we can identify what's the likelihood of this even happening, we can sometimes let that go. Another idea in working with anxiety is to look at what is solvable. Where is your locus of control in this situation? And then begin brainstorming. This, again, may be something you can do by yourself, get your notepads out, or maybe you want to sit with a friend over a coffee or an iced tea and be able to unpack some of these things. But make a list of all the possible solutions in this situation that's bringing you anxiety. And I would encourage you to even think outside of the box. Don't discount anything to begin with. And then focus on things that you have the power to change. Not the things that are beyond your control, but what are those things that you can do? Maybe it is just changing up your daily schedule. Maybe it is A, B, C. What are those things that you can change? Don't dwell on the things you can't, but look at the things you can. And then after you evaluate all of those things, you've got the pieces to the puzzle out on the desk. Now make an action plan. Put them together and say, this is what I can do. These are some steps I can do. And then just begin doing something about the problem. Action decreases anxiety. That is true physically. So if we physically get up and move, we're less anxious. But also if we do something with our process, it decreases anxiety. Please remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just should be a step towards the solution. Number 4, interrupt the worry cycle. Again, get up and start moving. Movement is a distraction. It helps to get the systems moving. It releases tension and stress. It increases your energy. It increases a sense of well-being. So when you feel stuck in something, then I would say move. Maybe go for a walk, hit the stairs, go up and down a couple of times, go get a drink of water, go have a brief conversation, some kind of movement that is a healthy distraction that gives you a little glimpse of something else that you can come back to and identify what it is that has got you locked in worry. And then secondly, I would suggest that maybe you try some deep breathing. So a lot of things physiologically impact us how we view them. When we worry, we become anxious, and then our breathing tends to become faster, which inadvertently makes us more anxious. So what do we do to break that cycle? One of those things is to slow down the breath, to be able to slow down the mind. And even when we speak in a slower manner, that helps to tone things down as well. A couple of tricks or tools that you could use. There is breathing techniques where you can inhale, hold it for 4 counts. Inhale for 4 counts, hold it for 7 counts, exhale it for 8 counts. Do 3 cycles of those. That helps to kind of regulate and get breathing going. You could separately or while you're working on breathing, consider a grounding technique. It's the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. You may be familiar with this. Look for 5 things. Identify 5 things in your surrounding. List them cognitively. Feel 4 things. Tactfully. Are my hands on something? Do I feel my feet on the floor? What are those things? Listen for 3 things. Smell 2 things. And taste 1 thing. I am a fan of these little red Starburst mints. I usually have them all over, anywhere I am, in my vehicle, in my office, in my pockets. These are a great thing. So if I feel like, okay, this is a great thing to taste and to hold me back a little bit. I would suggest even holding your dog. If you're a pet lover, I have this little golden doodle who is a cuddler, and I have found that when I hold Flynn and she lays on me, our breathing seems to sync, and she typically will fall asleep, and so her breathing slows down. So kind of a technique that helps in regulating is maybe being close to something that breathes slower, and then you try to match that. And then we know weighted blankets also can be a very helpful thing to kind of bring comfort, to bring relaxation, and affect breathing. A 5th idea, and I've already kind of alluded to this in a couple different places, it's going to be no surprise that the counselor guy says that it's important that we talk about worries. So talking face-to-face with somebody is very valuable. Choose the person who is going to be without judgment and without criticism and will not be distracted in the midst of a conversation, that you can then engage with in a calm, regimented way, talking about the issues. This does not have to be a professional, though professional certainly would be effective, but sometimes it's somebody already in your life where you can just have a meaningful conversation. Set it up so that we can focus without distraction. Let me just talk to you a little bit about what's going on in my life. Keeping worries to yourself really then causes them to build up until they become overwhelmed. So as we manage them when they present, it's going to decrease the opportunity for that to stack up within us. Speaking the thoughts out loud often help us to get a sense of what we're feeling. It puts things into perspective. Just the practice of getting it out of my head, through my mouth, and past my ears allows me to give a new perspective to this very often. Another idea is to build a support system. And again, we talked about professional support systems. That's valuable. We really only need a few trustworthy and caring individuals in our life. And if we can go to them when we're anxious, there's great benefit to that. So you're going to want to choose the individual where you find that comfort. Don't choose somebody that increases your anxiety. Do you feel better talking? Feel better after you speak to this person or not? Choose the person that it's going to be a positive outcome for you. So we've talked a little bit about stress and anxiety, and I just want to touch down on the idea here and let you know that anxiety also can build into what we would call fear, and it is the emotional response to what is real, but also what is perceived. And I will say that fear is very effective for what is real, because it kind of awakens things like fight, I need to confront this threat, or flight, I need to get out of here, I need to remove myself from this danger. Maybe freeze, I just need to stay here for safety. Or maybe fawn, I just need to comply to get through this and I'll be okay. So if it's real, I think fear plays a really important part in getting us through situations. But if it is perceived and not real, then I think there's great value to unpack that and be aware of, okay, I'm responding as if I'm in danger. Where's that coming from? Why am I picking that up? What's the reality of that situation? So when we talk about boundaries, and again, we talk about boundaries because they help us to stay in a place where we can care for ourselves well. Cloud and Townsend, we know, and you've likely read their work. I'm not going to go through it completely, but I'm just going to pull out a couple of their laws of boundaries that I think are valuable for us to, again, just remind ourselves of. The law of respect. We fear that others won't respect our boundaries. And so inadvertently, we don't make boundaries because of that, which then we lose that effectiveness. We focus on others and we lose the clarity about ourselves. That's a difficulty. Important for us to be able to recognize the boundaries that are valued by us and not to really fear what others will see or how they will respond in that. Another is the law of motivation. Sometimes we have difficulties with boundaries because we fear the loss of love, or we fear abandonment. If I draw this line in the sand, if I lay this boundary down, then this person is going to walk away from me. I'm going to lose that connection that is valuable to me. We sometimes fear others' anger. If I say no, thank you, what's that going to do? How are they going to respond to that? We may fear loneliness. There may be elements of guilt where we do good to overcome negative concept, and if I can't keep doing good, then how am I going to manage that? And so we sometimes do things for approval, to be recognized for what it is we do. The law of proactivity. So proactive people kind of get the ball rolling by showing what they love, what they want, what they stand for. They do this through their actions. They do this through consistent presentation. They do this through the things they talk about. So we rely upon effective communication to draw our boundaries, particularly in a proactive manner. And then the law of envy. Cloud and Townsend talks about the problem with envy is that it focuses on outside of our boundaries. It focuses onto others. It does us no good to worry about their boundaries. It's really our boundaries that we need to be looking at. And so until we're able to do that, we kind of even neglect our responsibilities by being worried about somebody else's boundaries. So we talked about self-care, and we've talked a little bit about boundaries and how we can maybe identify boundaries that help us with our anxiety, that help us to care for ourselves well. I would say that as we do that, then we also need to look ahead and think about the element of legacy. And legacy is a huge term. It's, when you think of legacy, I don't want you to think I have a huge estate that I'm going to leave to my children. I don't. It means that I'm going to take my time here on earth seriously in a way that leaves its mark. And so Craig Goldblatt, who is an impact coach, has kind of done some work with this, and he would identify legacy as the drive to create something that forever improves the world. It's very forward-looking. And I would present to you that you were all, by virtue of your position there at Southern Wesleyan, laying out legacy. I don't know that we all think of it in that manner. And so important to be able to identify the fact that what we're doing today is laying ahead. I would venture to say that you have worked incredibly hard this last year or two, that you have been incredibly flexible, that you have been incredibly innovative, that you have gone probably over and above with your doses of love and caring for those you minister to on campus. You are laying out your legacy as you do that. You're moving forward in that. And again, you only do that through good self-care and healthy boundaries. So legacy then is a motivator for us to establish healthy boundaries. I want to be in a safe place so I can move ahead and do important things. So here's the task of legacy. It is really to understand why you're leaving a legacy and what that personally means to you. How do you want to impact your family? And I think it's always good to start close in your circle. Talk about how you'll be remembered in your family. Not when you're gone, but after you leave a conversation, or tomorrow, how will you be remembered with how you acted or responded or how you moved ahead today? How will you impact your friends, your community, your country, and even into the world? The trickle down. It's not unreasonable to think that you may have that far-reaching impact. Jim Rohn says this. He said, "We are stewards of this world, and we have a calling in our lives to leave it better than we found it." And I think that applies to all of us. So when we talk about legacy, how am I making a difference today that makes it a better place than it was yesterday? Here's a place to begin. Understand your true purpose. If I'm talking about my legacy, then it's important that I understand my values. The values are what I think I value, but also what I live out and what are visible to others. So what are your values? What do you find compelling? What are you drawn to show to the world? What are you drawn to teach to those around you? What is compelling to you? And what are you passionate about? What fuels you in a way that may be unique to you? What can get in the way of legacy? Sometimes lack of focus. I wasn't looking at that. I need to look ahead and consider that in some way. Living the life that others want us to live gets in the way of building our own legacy. Bitterness, anger, fear gets in the way of freeing up the movement to pour into a legacy. Urgencies that smother priorities. And I think this is something to consider too. How much of our focus draws away from what is really most important. And again, Greg McGowan goes back to this in Essentialism and talks about focus on your priorities and not just the urgencies, or not the urgencies as the primary. It gets in the way when we think it's not going to matter. So how do we go about building a legacy? And many of you are probably already on this journey. You should probably take over and talk to us about this, but I've got just a few ideas that I want to share. First is serve in ways that bring you joy. Manage your world, manage how you minister, manage how you serve in a way that brings you joy, even in moderate elements. What are you doing when you make the biggest impact? Catch yourself impacting others. What was it that you just said? What was that connection that just happened? How did that happen? How did that make a difference? Identify that for yourself. Build your strengths and your skills. We all have a good amount of strengths. We all have skills on board. We can increase those. We can strengthen those. We can add to those. Continue to build those. Know yourself and then bring yourself. When we're talking authenticity, there's a lot of research being done on authenticity and the importance of showing up as you are wherever you are. Being the parent that also is the same individual in the pulpit on Sunday. Know yourself, bring yourself, be authentic. That's a big part of legacy. Do what matters now and don't wait for the opportunity to make a difference. Doing what's important now is the place to start that. And so seize small opportunities. It doesn't have to be a big chunk. It doesn't have to be this huge nonprofit that somebody's handing over to you. It may be a small opportunity that makes a difference. And then think service, not success. Don't run around building a legacy, but run around making a difference. Use your energy, not thinking, okay, this is the end of it. We'll know this is the end of it, but we get there because we're making a difference on every step of the way. And finally, place needs of others high on your needs list. And again, I think this is probably what you already do, but to recognize this is valuable to them, and by virtue of that, it's valuable to me. And so place those needs high on your own need list. And then just a final thought here from Emerson, and it is this: the purpose of life is not to be happy, it's to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well. And I would go back to say, if that happens, then we've got happiness, we've got contentment. So just to kind of bring its application here and to wrap up, I appreciate your time here, but I think it's important to recognize that if we care for ourselves well, in an order that we can establish healthy spaces, then we can place ourselves in a meaningful presence with others. And so care for ourselves, build healthy boundaries so that we can be in a meaningful spot as we serve and as we minister to those around us. Thank you for your time. Any questions, comments?
I am interested to know, I've never thought of purpose as being legacy. We're very focused on helping students find their passion and purpose in this life. I've never heard the term legacy, though. It's interesting because it takes a little bit of a different spin on purpose. I like it. I think it's It's certainly food for thought. I'd like to know, in your personal experience, what would you say would be kind of the major issue that people have? This could be your opinion or your observation in pursuing their purpose or feeling that perhaps they're not doing what it is they're intended to do in this life. It could be your personal or your observation, but I find that sometimes students will come to us and say, well, I don't know what my purpose is. I have no idea. Can't you tell me? And I'm thinking, no, that's not something I can tell you. Certainly the Lord can help inform that, and I believe the Lord does do that. But what are your thoughts on that as far as knowing if you are in your purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question, Deb, and I appreciate that. I think that as you identify young adults and even further into adulthood, we kind of wonder what that is. I think the first step is to being able to understand who we are as an individual, what our likes and dislikes are, and some would call it a calling. Some would call it my interest. I think whatever the terminology is, to identify some of those things that are already wired within us that maybe come from previous experience or for whatever reason we have this incredible interest in, for the individual to be able to explore that just a little bit and really come to a place where they're fairly comfortable with how they see themselves in this space, in this world. And then I think from there, there's a springboard that says, so now what? What can I do with this? I may have some very unique, something that doesn't line up with everybody, but it's going to line up with somebody. That might be what my purpose is. So I think it comes back to anything we can do to help that student uncover, unpack, explore, to decide what it is that's valuable to them as a person.
Thank you. Do you believe that people have more than one purpose in life?
I think that people have global purposes that are represented in different ways. My family would tell you that my purpose was one particular presentation. My students would probably see something just a little bit different. My community members would see something even different. So I think what drives me to be, and for me, I think this comes back to authenticity. If I'm the same person wherever I am, and I function myself that way, it will likely be pretty stable, but it will look different through different eyes.
I know we talked about the technology side of things, and my question for you was, is it the same thing with computers or not? So sometimes it's not social media for me. It actually would be more related to wanting to write on my computer. Do you find the same thing with screen time as a whole, or do you find it's different from computer versus social media? That's my question.
Great question, Brent. I believe it is the same, and I think sometimes we would try to justify our computer use as being more business focused. However, I can access just about everything on my computer that I can on my phone. So I think it kind of becomes the same thing. We feel a little bit more discreet, I think, when we're holding our phone at the dinner table than if we had pulled out our laptop. The end result is we disconnected from the person we're having dinner with, and we've disconnected from engagement there. So I think that it is the same, Brent. Now, saying that, I think back to our study times in my office late at night, and we both had our computer up, and we were working, still conversing, but it wasn't the same kind of conversation. So I think it does get in the way.
Thanks for listening to Moments That Matter, a podcast that looks at the moments in our lives that come along from time to time that have consequences long after the moment, especially those moments that have to do with the choice of vocation. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, Parker Palmer speaks of a clearness committee in the Quaker tradition, wherein a group of older, wiser people ask questions of someone considering a life choice as a way of clarifying the next step. We may not meet with a committee about these big decisions, but we all have these critical junctures in our lives, which we can think of as clearness committee moments. We need to pay attention to these moments because they are profound and potentially life-altering. We'll relay stories from our lives and interview others about theirs, especially noting the clearness committee moments, those we choose to recognize and those that were sadly ignored, those decisions that were made with God in mind and those that were not. Our hope is that these podcasts will cause you to think of the same kind of moments in your life with new clarity.